the biggest thing that attracted me to Workday was because their tagline is reimagining the future of work. And that was pretty special because we're at a point, I think, where we are about to reimagine how work gets done by whom as well, right? That's a critical thing. So it was the perfect moment to be at this nexus point of change.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today for the first time we have Shan, Moorthy, Chief Technology Officer for APAC at Workday, joining us. Welcome along, Shan. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here in the studio. Now, more often than not, the folks sitting here are New Zealand based, but where do you live?
I'm from Melbourne, grew up in Sydney, but I've worked around the world and travelled the world a bit more than I should.
Now, New Zealand is definitely sort of part of your beat, part of your area, looking after APAC. But fill us in on what your role covers in simple terms.
My role is to represent all the amazing engineering that happens at Workday, the technology that we build, and the real technical problems that we're trying to solve, and then trying to translate that and apply that at a regional level. So we have engineers all around the world. And we even have a engineering team based in Auckland.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
I get to come to Auckland and nerd out with my brother, and so it's always fun to come down here. So we have a follow the sun model when it comes to supporting the software, and so we have a team in the US, a team in Dublin, and a team in Auckland as the three points. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, so Auckland's actually a very early Workday hotspot.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So do you know how long that's been going in New Zealand?
I'm going to say it's getting close to or over 15 years now. So that's that. We were founded in 2005, and it wasn't long after that we had the Dublin team come through, and then Auckland was shortly after that.
Great. And for those who don't know what Workday is, how would you describe Workday for those who aren't using Workday, haven't come across it in the market? I know a lot of our listeners will, and they will have heard us mentioning Workday as one of our show partners, but how do you tend to sum things up?
To put simply, it's an enterprise application that manages people and money for organizations. So everything to do with HR, finance, and ancillary things like payroll and FP&A, planning, and those kind of things as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And in terms of the sort of scale of the customers that you tend to work with, how smaller organisation? What are the sort of smallest that would be using Workday? Because I know you work with some reasonably large organisations, but how small is your software able to kind of deal with?
It's a funny story. The smallest organisation is 6 people.
Yeah, okay.
It's a bunch of Bitcoin miners who have a very lucrative business. Yeah. But so they use, they purchase Workday, and so they use it. I guess the cool part about it is we operate one version of software around the world. So everybody's on that one piece of software.
Yeah. So
we have 11,000 customers around the world, all on the one thing, which means if we develop a feature for our biggest customer, our smallest customer also gets the same feature. Yeah. So in a way, it's a great equalizer. It doesn't really matter how big or small you are. You still benefit from the same things.
Yeah. Good. Now, I should say a big thank you to our show partners. So big thanks to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, Workday, and Gorilla Technology. So great to have that support, and really cool to get an introduction to Workday from you today, and to sort of delve into I guess a lot of the insights that you have from your travels around the region, and your experience from the different roles that you've had. Maybe tell us a little bit about that in terms of your background, taking on a CTO role for Workday, wearing that Chief Technology Officer hat. How does that work on a kind of on a regional basis? Because that's going to be different to, say, somebody sitting in the valley, your sort of global CTO. How does it vary?
I'll start with the background. So I've been traditionally in large enterprises in Australia.
Yeah.
I worked as a CTO for a publishing company, and I was making, doing the ebook. Famously had a publisher say that ebooks are a fad. And while I was working on implementing ebooks and working with Amazon and so on. So went from that to financial services industry, where I was chief data officer, chief technology officer there, and then went to the telecommunications industry as, looking after all of the software engineering there as well. So for me personally, when I go to a new role, I look for either an increased impact or an increased influence. One of the two things needs to be incremental. And so when I had this moment to review the opportunity at Workday, it's a global impact role. Regionally, it's huge, and the diversity of the region is there's a huge spectrum. Not quite appreciated globally how diverse APAC as a region is. We have hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultures, and English is cross-cutting, but not everywhere. And even down when you look at it from a software point of view, using multi-byte characters and single-byte characters for encoding and things like that. This is me becoming a full software engineer now. But yeah, those are even down to the bits and bytes. It's very different.
I mean, that came up in a conversation. I think yesterday I was having. It's funny you should mention it. It was some software that my team had developed for a client. It was sort of something quite custom, and it was just the reality. Some of the off-the-shelf products they were looking at not able to necessarily deal with some of the multi-language. You've got macrons and things like that, and you need the double byte characters to be able to deal with these things, right?
Yeah.
So there's always these sort of smaller aspects that actually become pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that then translates to how people do work as well. So, for example, the biggest thing that attracted me to Workday was because their tagline is reimagining the future of work, and that was pretty special because we're at a point, I think, where we are about to reimagine how work gets done. By whom as well, right? That's a critical thing. So it was the perfect moment to be at this nexus point of change. So that goes into that whole impact side of things that I look for.
Yeah. And in terms of the CTO who sits in the valley versus kind of what you do, how close do you kind of get in terms of the things that you're seeing and are able to be fed back, product wise versus what your global sort of CTO role would be? How do those roles vary?
A lot of it is around understanding the regional nuances and being able to surface that up at a product level.
Yeah.
Plus, we have engineering teams locally as well. So we've just opened up a development center in Chennai. So being a leader for them too, regionally.
Chennai, did you say?
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've got a couple.
So you're doing a fair bit of travel then?
It does keep me busy. So I've just finished a 4.5-week stint on the road. So Workday has an event called Elevate, which is about elevating its customers' awareness and educating them on the new things that are available. And my personal objective in that is to educate executives around strategically how to leverage the software. A lot of us are used to buying software and then letting it sit for 3 years until the renewal comes along, and then they go into a renegotiation or the reevaluation of, have we used this? That paradigm no longer exists or should exist because that's not the SaaS model, right? Software as a service. So a lot of it is educating them on that. There's also things around AI, which is my niche specialty.
You studied that, right?
Yeah, so I was studying AI in uni, natural language processing and machine augmented vision. So yeah, I was just joking earlier that when I spoke to my career advisor, and he said, yeah, you can get a job recognizing number plates on the tollway as career prospects. And at the time I was like, there's this thing called e-commerce going on, and I think that's a better bet. So I actually went into that path, and who would know, many decades later I would end up back on the AI seat.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Now, I guess with Workday, you talked about sort of the nature of SaaS software and in this world of software as a service, things don't just stay the same. How does that sort of work out in practice, for you and for the team in terms of how things iterate, how regularly is the software being updated? Do you have different versions in different regions and so on?
I've implemented Workday in 4 different organizations. So I was naturally curious how this software worked. When I started lifting the hood and looking in, I realized that there was a whole bunch of software principles that were taught in uni or very early on, that we should be adhering to these principles. But then we kind of abandoned them because it's easier, or it's just more convenient, and it's just too hard sometimes. Whereas with Workday, one of the things, they had these great principles is like, we will be cloud only. So at no point will we ever deploy on tin, because that's a fast path to unhappiness. Oh, that's going backwards, right? Like the other one was, there's only ever going to be one version of software. So if any salesman for Workday ever comes to you and says, would you like to buy version 2? They're pulling something over you. So there's this one version of software that we deploy to all 11,000 customers every Friday.
Yeah.
Right. So all of our engineers, they deploy their changes through the week. It gets bundled up, and then whatever has passed all the testing and all the security protocols and everything, then we automatically deploy that every Friday. That's a no negotiation event that happens. If you miss the train, you wait till next Friday.
Yeah.
So it's that first principle software engineering that is remarkable in this day and age, when it's a lot easier to say, oh, actually, you don't have to upgrade. You can stay on that old version. We'll create a fork for you that just solves your problem. Whereas the approach that Workday takes is, we solve this for everyone or no one at all. And that drives a different type of behavior, and it attracts a different kind of engineer that's able to think bigger picture rather than micro sort of solutions.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about AI, agents, automation. Yeah, this is an important role. There's an important place in technology, I think, for anybody involved in technology. We're looking, well, how can we automate things more? How can we lean in on that? What are the relevant roles of artificial intelligence? And of course, that kind of keeps evolving and changing. But those discussions are going on right across organisations. I was with a board and a senior leadership of a sizable New Zealand organisation today, and there was some pretty interesting things being discussed in terms of, as we were looking forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years, you start joining up some interesting dots. But if we look at kind of what's going on today, what are you seeing out there, and what are the things that stand out for you around AI, and how different countries, different regions are going with leveraging and adopting AI?
So the one thing that stands out is it's a constantly evolving space, rapidly, breakneck speed evolving space, right? Like only 6 months ago, we were talking about hallucinations and 6 fingers on hands and 3 legs on people in images, but you don't talk about that anymore because the models have improved to a point where it doesn't happen in. Now, from an enterprise point of view, there's a bit of resetting, I think, that needs to be done. So we had this Gen AI wave, a whole bunch of hype. My CEO came and tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, my son just made a haiku using Gen AI. What are we using it for in the corporate workspace?
Yeah.
And I was like, I had been waiting 25 years to answer this question, right? Like this is like my moment. I was like, do I know about AI or not? But most CIOs I speak to, they're like, their default answer is, yeah, I've deployed Microsoft Teams with Copilot. Hurrah. That's the bottom baseline, right? Like, but we also had this moment where we hitched a whole bunch of efficacy and productivity promises on generative AI, which, people were signing up for 20%, 30% increase in productivity based on the output of Gen AI. And in reality, they got maybe 4 or 5% of productivity up. And there's only so much that you can do with meeting room summaries and email generations, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
But then what happened was, but I think it's a necessary misstep because it suddenly made everyone familiar with AI, like AI in the workplace. Previously, we were talking about machine learning, and that was relegated to chief data officers and data scientists. It wasn't a common thing that everyone had some sort of literacy over. Suddenly, because it's in your living room, Gen AI has pushed AI into everyone's vocabulary. And so in the corporate, the enterprise space, it's made it okay to start discovering what AI, not generative AI, but what AI can do. And so what we've started seeing is this evolution into this agentic AI. And that's the promise of the application of some of the learnings from Gen AI applied in that enterprise space. So going from a commodity or a consumer AI, which is the Gen AI side of things, to an enterprise AI, which is, so I'll give you a basic example. If I go to any of the Gen AI providers, say ChatGPT,
Sure.
and I say, make a picture of a cat, it'll say, okay, Shan wants a picture. I'm going to go use a model that specializes in generating pictures. Then it goes, okay, he wants a picture of a cat. All right, I'm going to choose a model that specializes in animals. So the model that specializes in animals generates a cat, passes it to the model that generates the image, which then creates the picture of the cat, which then passes it to the original interpreting model, which then comes back to me and says, here's a picture of a cat as you asked for. Now, in itself, that's pretty rudimentary, but what's happened there is a reasoning model that has taken a complex request and broken it down into smaller tasks and delegated that out to smaller models. That's the bit that we've lifted and gone, if we give a complex task in the enterprise to a reasoning model, and that has access to simpler models which are able to execute those micro tasks, we should be able to string those tasks together to achieve a complex goal. And that's the whole promise of agentic AI. Now, the problem is, in the market, in order to be relevant, you have to have an agentic AI product or promise, or AI, at the very least AI in some of your product marketing, right? So you've got this flurry of products that are being thrown at executives, which don't necessarily achieve that agentic goal. And a very easy, one of the frameworks that I usually share with CIOs is, I call it AI interpreted actions and then AI executed actions. And the difference being that interpreted actions basically takes what you say, interprets what you intend, and then executes a bunch of predefined actions. So it's still quite deterministic because you have to define those actions.
Yes.
Right? So if you change the rules or if something changes, you have to redefine those actions anyway. It just it uses the LLM in between to interpret better or worse, right?
Or worse, yeah.
Whereas AI executed actions, in my personal reference, is where you teach the AI what is the policy, what is the law, what is the contract, what are the governance, risk, and compliance frameworks that you have to adhere to. And then you tell it, I don't care how you get the job done. This is the outcome that I want you to get to, right? And then you give it agency, hence the word agentic AI. You give it agency to operate within those bounds, so you know that it's still safe to achieve that outcome. The first time it might find a relatively inefficient way, and over time it might get better and better and better. But that's the same thing that happens with people as well. When you onboard someone on day one, they're pretty shit at their job. But that's by design because they've never experienced that company role before. Yeah. But you go back to them a year later, they're going to be experts at traversing the corporate structure, at getting the job done. So, and all the hacks that they found and the shortcuts and, all the ways that they can do things. So, and that's the same thing that we're seeing with true agentic AIs. Over time, it actually gets better because it educates itself. Now, when your policy changes or when your governance framework changes, you no longer have to redefine what it does. It should adapt, right? And that is where the true return on investment that we've all been looking for comes in. The flip side of that is the first one that I described, you can treat that as an application because it's quite deterministic. Applications by design are deterministic. They're not probabilistic. Whereas agents are probabilistic because you cannot, because you're giving it free will, kind of, to figure out the best pathway. You can't say hand on heart, this is how it's going to perform the second time around.
Yeah.
You can have lots of observability. You can say this is transparency on how it got there, but you can't predict how it's going to get there. So you can no longer treat it like an application. The actual closest analog to that is people. You have to start, when you onboard someone into an organization, you teach them what their policies are. You have to teach them what they're regulated by.
Yeah, it's all part of the onboarding, right?
It's all part of the onboarding. They have to do the mandatory learning courses that they click through and do all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you're doing that to a machine now. So it's an interesting, and this is what I love about the job is we're at a point where we're reimagining the future of work, and we're now defining a digital employee. It's a new class of employee. You got full-time permanent staff, you got contingent staff, and now you got digital employees. That's a whole world of.
So that's the lens that you look at it through, because it's something that that a few people do talk about, but it's not. Yeah, it's not been a mindset that I've adopted. Put it that way. So tell me a bit more around why you would take that tack.
So it actually comes down to, so our bread and butter is in people management, right? The way we look at it is you have roles in an organization. The roles require skills to be fulfilled.
Sure.
People have those skills, so therefore they fulfill the roles. So when it came to this agentic AI stuff, we started reverse engineering it, as engineers would do. And we went, okay, if a agent was to fulfill a role, therefore the agent needs to have skills. Over time, those skills need to improve. And then we looked at those learnings that we had from Gen AI with that reasoning model.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, there's this reasoning model that's able to take a complex task and break it down into simpler tasks. So that's a role that's being broken down into skills.
Yeah.
Right. So that when that clicked, everything fell into place, right?
Okay.
So what we then decided was you'd put a reasoning model in a role. The reasoning model would have delegate agents that it could call. Over time, we can augment that with more delegate agents or models that basically added to their skill set. Now, those could be skills that the company develops. They could be skills that we provide, or they could be skills that are downloaded from a marketplace. And that then makes this agent, again, more like a person than a application. So now you've got onboarding and offboarding of an agent. You've got the skills development of an agent. And if you really think about it, over time, the tenure of an agent makes them more worthwhile too, right? Like an agent that's been in place for a year is worth more than an agent that's been there for one day, because it's got memory, and that's the thing, right? Like, so we're at a point where the power of the compute and the amount of memory, like I remember, 2 years ago, the number of parameters that a model would have was around the 200,000 mark or something like that. And Google just came out with, I think Gemini uses 7 billion parameters. Right? The speed of innovation and the amount of memory that it can retain makes it start mimicking human behavior more and more. So it's a fascinating space. And for me, the big point of differentiation is when you start looking at it as, and we're not talking about replacing people here. We're talking about taking the roles, the mundane roles that, the drudgery that people don't want, and abstracting it away, or possibly even allowing the same people who are charged with those roles to be able to delegate that to an agent and then manage the output of that agent so that they're still fulfilling the task. They're just getting it done in a different way. So that's the fascinating space, is where, where org charts will suddenly have people and then agents reporting to people, or people delegating tasks to agents and then managing the outcomes.
Well, this is an interesting one, because often when I'm looking at an org chart, it's coming out of a tool such as Workday, right? So you're probably in more of a position to be able to influence that if Workday is generating the org chart, and then your agents can then appear in there.
Yeah, and then you start looking into like interesting scenarios, like say Team A has an agent deployed, right, and it's working quite well. The financial performance of that agent is good, the accuracy of the agent is good, the productivity of that team has been uplifted because of that agent being there. So what about replicating it to Team B? Now, if Team A and Team B have different delegations, they have different permissions, they have different access controls, then you need to be able to, that new agent needs to be able to inherit the new permissions as well. Yeah. So that's where we looked at it and went, well, when we manage people and the way we move people around, when you move to a new team, they inherit all the security concerns and permissions that are associated with that role. So why not apply that to the agent as well?
Sure.
So we developed this thing called the agent system of record. So we have a people system of record and an agent system of record, and they just happen to coexist. But then something wild happened, which was Microsoft went, well, if you guys are going to be the system of record for agents, and they have this thing called Entra ID. So when a person is onboarded into an organization, we issue an employee ID that then cascades to Microsoft, who then manages the permissioning and the security around it.
Sure.
Access controls and things like that. So they said, okay, well, if you have an agent system of record, when you onboard an agent, we will manage the security and permissioning using Entra ID as well. So they announced that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So these kind of things sort of started, gathering momentum, let's say.
Mm-hmm. And so, what do you think is the right way of how companies will sort of pay for these resources? Because looking at it through that lens, the immediate thing in my mind is Microsoft have got another user in Entra ID they can charge for. Workday's got a, et cetera, et cetera. So you end up with varying sort of software costs. And part of the interesting thing around utilizing more technology is, the financial sort of efficiencies and so on that it brings. So
part of our promise is to make sure that there's that financial transparency, how much value has been generated. So one of the things, as I said, we rely on first principles. One of the first principles we have is we need to have demonstrable value from deploying that agent. Otherwise, we're not in this for the short game, right? Like, we don't want to just sell something for a year and then someone go, well, this is useless, and then rip it out.
Yeah.
Right. Especially in SaaS, because that optionality is, you're not locked into multi-year contracts and things like that. You could change your mind on a annual, monthly basis even sometimes.
Pretty hard to change though when you implement an enterprise level product. There's a fair bit of pain and work to migrate from one to another in most cases.
Well, it shouldn't be for agents. I mean, that's the whole promise of them, right? That they should be easy to implement. They augment your existing workforce and the way that you do work. It's they make life easier for you. So it's all around the amount of value that you generate and right-sizing that, the pricing there.
Yeah, okay.
I know there are some companies that will go on consumption-based, but really if you're consuming and not really generating value, then are you really getting the best out of it? Yeah. So there's all those things. Headcount doesn't necessarily scale with software when you think of it as an agent, because if I have two replicas of the same agent, do I pay twice? But if it's generating twice the amount of value, then possibly. So that dynamic is yet to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It sounds like there probably is a chunk more in here in terms of iteration of business models and structures behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
and we're going to be led by our customers. So, I mean, again, going back to these first principles, right? Like, so we actually had our engineering teams. We had a moment where we had hundreds of engineering teams come back and say, we're all developing AI agents. And we're like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, not everyone should be developing AI agents. I mean, we even had an analyst call where they openly asked us, how come your competitors are developing or announcing thousands of agents and you guys are just signing up for a dozen? And we basically said it's because we value quality over quantity. But then internally, our engineering teams were like, we all want to build AI. Like, we all want to build AI agents. And so we had to put down some rules as to who is allowed to build and why they're allowed to build. So, for example, if it's not a hard problem to solve, we won't try to solve it, because the assumption there is if it's easy, everyone's going to solve it, right? So then you're going to be competing against hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. If it relies on a data set that we don't control, we won't build an AI agent around it. So, I mean, there's other SaaS providers who have said that they'll build recruiting agents based on data that doesn't exist. So they're going to borrow it from a third party. Now, if you can't control the quality of the data that powers the agent and the learning and the modeling behind it, then you can't guarantee the quality of your agent either. So that's something that we will only build in our domain of expertise. There's things around, if our customers don't love it, we won't release it. And this is where the ROI equation comes in. We absolutely want to make sure that our engineering teams are spending their time building products that people are going to realize value out of. Otherwise, it's a short-term outcome. We don't want to be in the business or have the reputation of building toys that are thrown away after 6 months.
Yeah.
Because we are we are firmly in the enterprise space, right? Like in the consumer market, that might fly, but not in the enterprise space.
It's good. With your software engineering teams, what role does AI play there in developing your software?
So we actually we have two sides to our technology. One is business technology, which is the internal technology that we use to do our own things. And then there's the technology that we build for our customers, right? So two sides. Internally, we've actually, there is a program where we're rolling out Cursor to our engineers so that they can use generative code generation.
Yeah.
We're looking at automation in testing and increase auditability and observability of build pipelines and so on. So wherever we can increase the engineering productivity, we are actively looking to boost that as well. And then internally we call it the LLM mafia, which is a homegrown name, but it's a communal space where people share the latest, coolest things that are happening. And because everything's changing so fast, everyone brings a piece to the party, and then everyone benefits. So internally there's a buzz with our engineering teams. It helps that we're working on some of this bleeding edge technology as well. Plus, we're partnering with some pretty heavy hitting names as well: Anthropic, Google, etc. So, Google a week ago, I think, put up a slide announcing the agent to agent protocol, and our logo was on that slide because we said, we'll partake in this. Now, this is a rapidly evolving space where, it's like the old days when. I can't say old days, but when we were trying to figure out how to do REST APIs and everyone was trying to figure out what that standard should be, and we ended up with RESTful as the protocol. So we're at that point where there are multiple protocols being suggested on how agents talk to each other. There's no clear winner yet, but there's a couple of horses in the race that we're betting on. So this, again, it's a rapidly evolving space. So it requires our engineering team to be curious and hungry and bring as much knowledge back home. It's like these worker bees that go out and then bring that knowledge back home and share with everyone else. So that we can make the best decisions in a rapidly evolving space.
So it seems like within Workday, AI plays a pretty important role. When you're interacting with your clients and others as you sort of travel around the region, what are you seeing in terms of how well organizations are getting their head around AI and where it sits within their planning, within their strategies? Are businesses doing well on this front, or does it vary a lot from region to region?
So it varies by it varies by geography and also by industry. So, for example, there are some industries which are considered intrinsic to national security. Telcos, banks, if they fall over, then it compromises national security.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of governance around that and policies that affect that, data sovereignty rules, for example. So there are some industries which are more heavily regulated, which can sort of hinder experimentation in some of those spaces, especially the novel spaces. Then culturally, there are the, geographically, where we see ways of working and organizational structures which might yield better outputs when augmented with AI, or sometimes it might be resistant to implementing AI as well. I know that Copilot seems to be the base for all of this stuff. No matter who I speak to, they've at least got that in, right? So I know there's a pathway in there, and I think as it becomes a norm, I think it's going to become easier. So we are talking to government bodies who are now okay with using AI because they still have the same constraints on dwindling operating costs and higher productivity needs. So they're not excused from the conversation just because there's regulation. They just have a harder journey.
Sure.
And one of the interesting phenomenon with this AI stuff, it's if you're familiar with some of the financial services lingo, there's this notion of residual risk, right? So residual risk is the amount of perceived risk that an application brings to the table minus the risk that is reduced by the controls that you put on top of that application.
Yeah.
Right. So what is your mitigation strategy? What is your remediation strategy, etc.? When it comes to AI, that perceived risk is significantly higher than an equivalent application that does the same thing.
Interesting.
And it's true because, so for example, let's say reviewing someone's salary, right? Like if someone a person was supposed to be doing that in a business process, they might get through 50 reviews in a day. If they screw that up, then you've got 50 apologies you have to give to people. Within 24 hours, you can fix that, right?
Yeah.
You give that to a machine, and within 5 minutes, it's done 1,000 reviews. And if it gets that wrong, that's front page news, right? So the sophistication of the controls that you had to apply on something that's operating at that speed and scale needs to be far more than what we're traditionally used to. So a lot of the executives that I speak to who are like, okay, I'm not ready for agentic AI yet. I'm not ready for agents. What do I do in the meantime? And I'm like, well, get your data model right, first of all, right? Because whatever is acting on your data model is going to end up performing the same way. So at least get that as good as you can. The second one is consolidate onto platforms. So I think the days of microservices and best of breed, I think, are behind us, where we, as personally, even as a CTO, what I did was I went out and bought 100 different applications that did one thing well. And then my poor engineering team was then charged with integrating all of these applications together, which meant I then bore the cost of the operating, the links between these things. And there was a fragile, ecosystem where one update to one system would be like disaster for the other 99. So it was this fragile ecosystem that I bore the cost of operating. Whereas now the strategy is moving towards using these platforms which bring ecosystems, and that ecosystem guarantees a level of integration out of the box and reduces some of that risk and definitely reduces some of the operating costs of maintaining compatibility between things.
Yeah.
Right. So again, most CIOs have this large portfolio of applications, they need to start rationalizing those things into smaller portfolios, domain-based rationalization. So in the domain of people, rationalize it to Workday. In the domain of CRM, rationalize it to, I don't know, Salesforce. There are some common sense SaaS platforms that you can rationalize to, which means then you can leverage some of the innovation coming out of this as well. So you're not investing in, no one should be trying to innovate in the people and money space when we bring that for free, right? On a quarterly basis, we'll give you new features. Why would you want to build something ancillary to that?
Gotcha.
So those are things that they can do. And then there's this whole concept.
People still will, though, of course, right? But I guess what you're saying is that thinking needs to change.
So every business has a place where they make money, right? So if you're a bank, you make money by issuing loans or credits and things like that.
Focus on that.
Yeah, if you're an e-commerce platform, it's by having an amazing trading experience with the customer. So focus on those areas and then leverage the innovation from all these other spaces. And so what that means is then you've trained the organization to constantly, and this is the thing, we have to move from organizations that think in these big waterfall 3-year projects and reevaluating software on a 3-year basis to organizations that on a quarterly basis can go, is my business process working as optimally as it should? And if not, can I reinvent it? That is the kind of organization that's ripe and ready for an agentic world.
Gotcha.
The type of organization that sits back and says, this is a 3-year change program, they're not going to get the agentic change.
It's going to be too hard to make
too big a leap, I think.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. A lot more we could delve into, but I thought it would be good to just finish on a little bit of a personal note. I was doing a bit of reading around, some of your interests, and you use a bit of automation within the home, a bit of AI. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so I call myself a hacker in the traditional sense. This is being a kid growing up in the 90s. So there is not a single gadget that I won't open up and try to modify, and whether it's a car or something, around the house. So as an example, I've got a coffee machine, a double boiler traditional coffee machine, and one of the things that irritated me was that every morning when I get down, I have to turn the machine on and wait for it to warm up. So I was like, okay, and I've got Home Assistant running in my own server at home. There's a whole bunch of milliwave sensors around the house which know exactly where everyone is. So I basically wrote a little Lua script, basically, which recognizes a signal for where I have left the room, my bedroom, and when it detects that I'm coming downstairs, it sends a signal to an ESP32 that's embedded within the coffee machine that turns the machine on. So by the time I arrive, the coffee machine is nice and warm and ready for me to pull a shot of coffee.
Oh, that's a bit of fun. That's cool.
That's a level of insanity that my wife has to put up with.
Brilliant. No, it's always good to hear those sort of bits and pieces. It sort of fills out the picture a bit more. Look, there is a lot more that we could have delved into, but I've really enjoyed the depth we've gone to in a number of different areas. So we'll have to save a bit more up for next time around.
No worries.
Are you in New Zealand very often? Is it a regular kind of visit for you?
It's getting
New
more
Zealand?
and more frequent, which is actually quite nice.
Okay.
I do love this part of the world. Previously, we holidayed in New Zealand a lot. Now I get to come for work as well and enjoy the surrounds.
Okay, now we've been talking a lot about AI. Before we started, we had a bit of a discussion around sort of comparing different countries, and we quite often on the show like to delve into how New Zealand's doing versus Australia. Now, if we look on the broadband front, New Zealand does pretty well.
Yeah, Australia is worse than a third world country when it comes to broadband. So that's a bit unfair.
So we like to wave that flag. It makes us feel good. But tell us, in terms of what you're seeing with New Zealand businesses and how we're going with AI adoption, are we in front or behind Australia?
When it comes
be brutally honest.
When it comes to the average, the small to medium enterprise, New Zealand is traditionally or more conservative when it comes to some of these things. Well, and I think that might have something to do with some of the data sovereignty policies or differences in laws that might apply, or maybe it's the reach of those organizations. Australia seems to always want to go global, whereas New Zealand is quite happy. Most New Zealand companies are happy just servicing New Zealanders as best as they can, New Zealanders as best as they can. But then you got companies like Xero and some of the digital darlings who are light years ahead, right? And they're really pushing the boundaries of what they can do with AI as well. So it's not a blanket rule, but in general, leaders a bit more conservative. They tend to watch what's happening across the ditch and then follow, which is ironic because the Australians watch what's happening in the US and then follow that.
Yeah.
So I think there is an opportunity for leaders in New Zealand to leapfrog the Australians.
Yeah.
And use that agility to really. One of the things that I've heard recently is if you wait for a use case to be presented to you so that you can base your business case on, you've already been left behind. So aspire to be the use case rather than wait for a use case.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's one of those things. I think there is a really good opportunity for leaders in New Zealand to be the use case.
Excellent. Before we wrap up, anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think look, the main thing is I get a kick out of challenging conventional wisdom. And there's always been this conventional wisdom that applications are applications and they should be treated using an asset database and a deployment cycle using traditional IT. And the thing that really blows most IT leaders is when I go, are you going to centrally manage all of these agents, or are you going to, it's not like you manage all the people in the organization. Why would you want to do the same thing with your digital employees? And the other one is that whole notion of IT being like the new HR. So IT onboards these agents for the organization to use, just like HR onboards people for the organization to use. So it's a changing dynamic for IT in a lot of organizations and what IT leaders actually do and what kind of risks that they underwrite and they take on as well. So really one of the things that I would want IT leaders and influencers to really ponder is what is their role in the future and what impact are they going to have and what the policies and the governance frameworks of yesteryear are not going to apply going forward. So there is a moment to reimagine what that looks like. And in the short term, it's not a year away, it's not 2 years away, it's now.
There's probably quite a rabbit hole we could go down on that one. We might have to save that one up, but yeah, I think it's probably important for all of us that we're continuing to reevaluate and rethink and be looking forward. But that sounds like something that's that should be right on the table right now. So that's great.
Yeah.
Oh well, thank you so much, Shan. Great to have you on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join us in the studio here. And, of course, a big thank you to our show partners, including Workday, Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. We'll look forward to catching you on the next episode. All right, see you then.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.